I'd like to welcome you to tonight's meeting of the New York Technology Council. Delighted to have you here. So delighted to have Gabe Zichermann talking tonight about gamification. Should be very interesting. About half of you aren't members of NYTECH, so let me first urge you to join. I want to thank our annual sponsors. We've got at least 2 more joining next month. It sounds trite, but without them we wouldn't be here. We depend on their support for what we do. I want to give a thanks to Anchin for providing this space tonight. It's always nice to be here, and we certainly appreciate it. With that, let me turn it over to Gabe.
Thank you. Yes, I got that. Great, we have this one.
Thank you.
Hopefully all the technology collaborates with us, which it appears to be doing. Oh, you guys. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. How glad are you that the air conditioning is working here? 100%. It's so funny because I always think about like European conferences. For some reason, like in major European cities, they're still convinced that it's not like summer doesn't require air conditioning. So like my great fear is having to go into a talk in like London in July because it could be either like totally comfortable or like 100 million degrees. But at least everyone doesn't have to wear suits here. So you're all going to be comfortable, and you, Zaya, might be a little warm. If you want to roll that shade down, by all means do. So I want to talk to you about the gamification revolution, the world that we're in, and many of you saw the book is out there. And if you want me to sign a copy for you, by all means, grab one. Let me know. I'll sign one for you afterwards. I both have a talk for you, and also we'll talk a bit extemporaneously today, and may swear. So if you're offended by that sort of thing, I'm sorry, but not really. So it is New York after all. Okay, so let's put this thing into context for 1 second. I don't know if you feel this way. I'm not that old, but here's how I feel. I feel like we're in the middle of some kind of weird engagement crisis. Do you ever feel that way? Like people can't pay attention to or focus on anything anymore for any length of time. Like you just cannot get people to you cannot keep their attention. It doesn't matter what you do, you cannot keep their attention for any length of time.
What did you just say?
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, we have like amygdala issues preventing people from retaining memories. So we live in this weird world, right? Now, this instinct is starting to be supported by data. So we moved past just like sense of that to actual data about it. So, for example, Microsoft research says 98% of people will spend less than 10 seconds on a new website and decide in that time whether or not that company is worth doing business with. Holy shit, right? It wasn't that long ago, it took longer than 10 seconds to load a website. And it really wasn't that long ago, really. And now we make those decisions so fast. And forget 10 seconds, time yourself next time. I do it in much faster than that on average, right? And you probably do too. Or this crazy thing from Nielsen. The last month, 80% of the population has used a second or third screen, an iPad, iPhone, some other kind of touch device, while watching television. Now, used to be that television was the distraction. And now we need a distraction from the distraction just to feel like our minds are engaged. Otherwise, we're sitting there crawling the walls. What? Just this? For 22 minutes, just this? I can't only do this alone. Or, probably the most kind of shocking or painful one, a fifth of the population today will check their smartphone every 10 minutes from the moment they wake up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night. That is 100 deliberate and purposeful looks at their smartphone in a day. 100. Wow. Holy jeez. That's bad news. But how bad is this news? Now, it's not that big of a deal unless you happen to be the world's largest automakers. Let me put it in context for you. A few months ago, one of the biggest automakers came to me and said, Gabe, we have a problem. And I'm like, cool, I like problems. Let's talk about it. And I was like, what is it? They're like, okay, for the first time in history, the American teenager wants to drive less than their parents do. Driving interest among American teens is on the decline. This has never happened since the introduction of the car. And I was like, oh my God, well that's crazy. I'm like, what's going on? So they said, well, the millennial generation, there's a number of things going on. One, they don't like the environmental impact of cars. Two, they don't want to spend money on frivolous things, they don't want to spend money on driving. But really, their research was showing The reason why American teens want to drive less than previous generations, the main reason, was because they cannot text or Instagram while behind the wheel of a car, and so they choose not to drive. They're choosing not to drive. Let's just put this into context. What does this mean? Behaviors that are fundamentally entrenched in our culture, things which are so closely aligned with this society, with this culture, can be undone incredibly quickly by applications, products, services, ideas that engage people and promote them to follow their bliss, to follow where their positive reinforcement lies. If you told me 5 years ago that Instagram would kill the car, I would have probably laughed you out of the room. But it turns out that the most powerful force to fix the environment may actually be photo sharing. Crazy, but true. Having a bigger impact and having it faster than most other services. At the heart of all of this is the power of games. The power of games. Now, I know that is going to seem kind of weird, but let me explain what I mean. So for example, apps like Instagram, I referenced it a couple of times already. Now you're going to say Gabe, wait a minute, power of games. This isn't a game. Instagram's not a game, right? That's not a game. And I agree with you, it's not a game. It does, however, have many of the kind of characteristics of games if you start looking at it closely. This looks a little bit like a scoreboard to me when I first look at it, right? Tracking some stats. Or for example, something like Mint.com, which revolutionized the personal finance industry, using things like challenges. Foursquare, which many of you are familiar with, a quote-unquote New York tech success story, which has gotten millions of people to do an activity that really doesn't make any sense by using concepts from games like badges and rewards. Or Nike Plus. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about Nike Plus, but let me put this into context for you. When Nike Plus is a hardware and software combination, you attach it to you wear it, and you run around, and it tells you how you're doing, and gives you all this feedback about how you're doing. Okay, so when Nike invented this thing in 2004, when they started working on Nike Plus in 2004, they were not the dominant running shoe brand in the United States. Though you may recall that the company was founded by hardcore runners, and that was its raison d'etre, that's how it was founded. But in 2004, New Balance and Asics were the number one and number two brands of running shoes in the United States, and many of you who run still run in New Balance. They had taken over. Nike was a fashion brand, and New Balance was a serious runner brand. And the company needed a way to change that equation and to harness the power of mobile technology which came out. And so they built Nike Plus. And today, 5 million people in the United States will run using Nike Plus. 5 million people will run with Nike Plus. For them, the definition of Nike, what Nike is to them, is something very different from what the company used to be. It's not an apparel brand. It is a personal goal fulfillment brand. It is a wish fulfillment company that, oh, by the way, sells some apparel inside. Because for those 5 million people, the advertising notion of Nike helps you get where you need to go, just do it, da-da-da, is visceral, it's real. The brand is with them every step of the way. Change the relationship entirely, and change the nature of what it means to be this company. So having very, very sort of profound effects. The term we use to describe this in the broadest sense is gamification. And many of you have heard the term, some of you may have seen other talks, gone to do different things related to it. But what does it mean? And I've talked about this definition a lot. Gamification is the use, engaging users using the best ideas from games, game design, loyalty programs, and behavioral economics. And the jarring thing here, this is a jarring thing, because I didn't just say games, which is a very common thing. Like I say gamification, and you think games, right? But in fact, in many cases, that's not at all what it means. Let's talk about what it doesn't mean though, because this makes it easier to put into context when we describe what it doesn't mean. It's not just about throwing some badges up on a website, which is an important thing. You've seen many gamification examples that use badges. Badges are important and meaningful. They're not enough in and of themselves. They are powerful and meaningful, but they have to be part of a system that has meaning in and of itself to be valuable, to change behavior. And the second thing that gamification is not, which I just alluded to a minute ago, is it's not about turning everything into a game. And this is probably one of the most difficult things to wrap your heads around. Let me ask you a question. Are all games amazing? Are they all successful? Do games companies make money? P.S. Not really. Right? It's actually kind of a shit show in the games industry if you look at their numbers. Not the best. They fail more than 85% of the time to connect with an audience of meaning. Just like every other entertainment industry product is exactly the same way. Music is the same way, books are the same way, movies are the same way. It's not like if we just make something into a game, it doesn't suddenly make it amazing. If your product or service is a piece of shit, making it into a game will simply result in a game-like piece of shit. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. We can use every analogy in the world to describe that, but that's the most direct way to express that. Okay? There is no way around it. Turning something into a game doesn't magically make it work. Right? We don't want to actually get caught in the trap of just making things into games for the sake of doing that. And one thing I don't want you to do, I don't want you to go back to your organizations, wherever you work, and you work in a diverse range of organizations, from government to startups in this room right now. I don't want you to go back to your organization and say, I saw Gabe, I get the gospel, I have found Jesus, we are changing our company into a games company. Do not do that. Do not do that. I do not want you to do that. Unless, of course, you already run a games company, in which case that's a perfectly valid thing for you to do. Otherwise, I do not want you to assume that the meaning of gamification, the power of this, the reason why we care about all this, the examples I'm going to show you, the design patterns I'm going to share with you, that what this all points to is you should run a games company. Nothing could be further from the truth. They are as in the shit as anybody else. They don't understand their customer any better than you do, and often worse. What you're going to do is you're going to take the best ideas from them, and from loyalty programs, and from behavioral economics, and using a set of tools and techniques, you're going to build them into whatever you're doing to make it cut through the noise, to get and retain the attention and engagement from consumers and employees that you need in order to be successful, as this level of ADD ratchets up into the stratosphere. That makes sense? Right? We're not becoming games companies. Okay. I know that seems obvious, but it's not always obvious. All right, so just by brief way of introduction, so I'm Gabe Zichermann. I'm originally Canadian. I know that's someone from the government of Canada. Just so that we have a Canada moment. I've written 3 books on this subject of gamification. I wrote my first book called Game-Based Marketing. It came out in 2010. It was like kind of the first book to look at how games interact with business in a kind of overarching way. I wrote another book called Gamification by Design, which is the sort of definitive design book for how to build a gamified system. And Gamification Revolution, which is my new book, which is outside, some of you have it, some of you don't, I'll sign it for you, which is all about the strategic view of how companies are using gamification to get leverage over their competition. And this is a common theme that I start to see in the examples, which is early mover, first mover companies that were using gamification were able to engage Generation Y, engage the millennials in a way that other companies were not able to. And what they've been able to do is get extraordinary productivity, performance, and outcomes from their employees, and extraordinary engagement, time, and money from their customers by doing so. That's the theme of the Gamification Revolution. So it's case studies, overarching design patterns. We'll talk about some of those today. I edit the main website, which is called gamification.co. I'm the co-founder of a strategic consultancy called Dopamine. We build cool things like this, which is a thing called Meme Cube that we built, which is all about activating people in real time in live environments with gamification. So we built this cool thing for conferences where you use Twitter in a gamified way and you complete challenges and you unlock cool things like secret sessions with me, which happened at our conference. So if you were one of the top most retweeted people at the conference, you got this secret message that said, come meet me at 2 o'clock in this place, and we had like a special fun time, really cool. We didn't have sex. It was so dirty, it's crazy. So we also work with all kinds of companies, big and small, to help them understand gamification as a strategy. We run this conference called G Summit. I put this URL on the board for you for one reason in particular, which is, I'm going to show you some examples of gamification. If you're interested in understanding those in greater detail, you can go to gsummit.com and look at videos of many of the people who built the examples I'm going to show you today have spoken at G Summit, almost all of them have. So you can watch them talk at greater length about what they did and why they did it, and how they did it and what they learned. So it's a useful place for you to go see those sorts of things. And if you're especially interested, you can actually earn a certification in gamified design. So if you want to learn how to do this in more tangible terms and want to make it part of your career, you actually can earn certification in this design practice, live or online. as you like at various levels of complexity, okay? So let's talk about, before we talk about some examples, let's talk about why gamification works for a second. The science. So there's lots of science, it's really cool, I talk about science all day, but the most important one, the most important piece of science for understanding gamification and the engagement crisis is a concept called intrinsic reinforcement, okay? So here's how intrinsic reinforcement works. Anytime you challenge yourself to something, it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter how big or how small it is, it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, it makes no difference at all, and you achieve that thing, your brain secretes a little bit of a magical neurotransmitter called dopamine, okay? So challenge, achievement, because dopamine is pleasurable, right? Feels good, feels good. Challenge, achievement, pleasure. And in fact, we now know that dopamine is released in anticipation of achievement as well. So challenge, oh my God, I think I'm gonna get it, pleasure, right? Now, what happens when you get that release of dopamine? What's the next thing that happens? The next thing that happens is your brain says, please ma'am, may I have another? Right? And you go back into the loop again. I want that again, because that was good. That was good. That felt good. I want it again. Right? Boom. And around you go. And again. Now, you can get this dopamine release, as I mentioned, doing anything. But how often in your regular daily life do you get this? Right? Not that often, because you can't beat your personal best in a marathon every frickin' day. Your kids can't graduate from college every day. You can't learn a new language every day. You can't get a promotion every day. The world isn't set up that way. So we do crazy things, right? Like invent little games so we can get this. Like, can I get through the subway doors the last minute? You do these things in your head so you can get this thing. It's a very interesting thing about humans. We think it's only humans that have this characteristic. We don't know of any other animals that have intrinsic reinforcement like this, like the human way. What makes it particularly interesting is it explains a lot about why the world is so beautiful and fucked up at the same time. Because there's no connection between this and goodness. There's no ethical compass for this function. This function simply exists. So it's important to know that you want this, and you've all been exposed to it at some point, and you want more of it than the world gives you in its natural state today. When we design games, not gamified experiences, but games, they're designed to do this hundreds of times per hour. This over and over and over again, because this is all a game is in its basic mechanistic form. Challenge achievement, challenge achievement, challenge achievement, over and over again, right? Super attractive to your reptilian brain, this idea, because it's a lot of that dopamine release. So the goal is to bridge the gap between those two things. Let's talk about some examples that might do that and put this into context. One of my favorite examples, if you've seen me talk about it, often talk about it, it's called speed camera lottery. So you guys all know speeding cameras? You're all familiar with them? You drive too fast by the camera and takes a picture of you behind the wheel and your license plate and they send you a big ticket. Okay. So in Sweden, as in many of the Nordic countries, the ticket that you get for speeding is not based on how fast you're going at the point of control, it's based on how much money you make. So Sweden in 2010 gave out the world's biggest known speeding ticket. It was a $250,000 single speeding infraction. Single. So I'm sure it was the president of IKEA or the band member of ABBA or someone from Sweden. Because like famous Swedes, those are people you think of. Okay. So, set against this backdrop, a guy named Kevin Richardson reimagines the speeding camera. And here's how it works. Instead of you drive by the speeding camera too fast, you take your picture, you get a ticket in the mail, the way speed camera lottery works is you drive above the speed limit, you get the ticket, but anyone who drives at or below the limit is automatically entered into a lottery to split the proceeds of the people who speed. Okay, so which method of behavior change do you think works better? In scenario one, you know what? We trust you. You're a good member of society. You're a good employee. You're a good egg. You know what you should do. You're part of this thing. You're part of this team. We know you're going to be good. You do the right thing. We know. But actually, we're secretly waiting behind a corner where you have no idea. And if we catch you, man, we're going to fuck up your life. Or slow, drip-wise positive social reinforcement for a job well done each and every time and a punishment if you don't comply. Obviously B, right? Obviously this thing, because otherwise it wouldn't be on the screen, I wouldn't be hitting this point so hard. This works a lot better at changing people's behavior. Let me tell you how much better. Speed camera lottery lowered speeding by 20 kilometers per hour at the point of control. And guys, with no marketing, just this, the sign says speed camera lottery, that's it. 20 kilometers an hour. It is the most successful speeding behavior change at scale ever done in history. To put that into context, the United States has changed the speed limit, national speed limit, some of you might know, 3 times in the last 40 years. It has had absolutely no effect on the average speed of the American driver. True story. At THSA data, no change, none, 0, nothing. This works though. And it works by thinking about things through a gamified prism, right? How do we make things work the way that people's brains actually work? And at their core, all systems that are good at engagement have 3 key characteristics: feedback, friends, and fun. They have these 3 things in them in spades. They give you feedback to tell you how you're doing. They have friends, so they bring your social graph into the mix, and they're fun. Now, this last F, fun, is a little squirrely, right? It means different things to different people. I'm sure many of you in the room do something every day that other people wouldn't consider fun. And so you understand there's a little bit of that snowflake effect of fun. But we're going to look at a few different examples that view this all through a different prism. So one of my favorite ones comes from Domino's Pizza. So, you guys all know Domino's, you probably don't eat there. But, because you're a New Yorker, and why would you eat at Domino's in New York City? Unless you're a tourist. Okay, so Domino's has this app called Domino's Pizza Hero. It's an iOS app. You can download it for your iPhone or your iPad. And in Domino's Pizza Hero, you play a pizzaiolo or a pizzaiola, someone who makes pizzas. You make the dough, you roll it out, you flip it in the air, you get your ingredients, you put them on the pizza, And as you learn how to do that and you get to a certain point and a certain quality and you're good enough at doing it, you can actually flick the pizza to your local Domino's and it will be baked and shipped to you in real life, right out of the game. And if you're exceptionally good at what you do, they will actually invite you to apply for a job. True story. In the first 7 weeks of release of Domino's Pizza Hero, the chain has added an incremental $1 million in revenue to the company overall from the introduction of this game. And we don't know, they've never released how many people have been invited to apply for a job and how many people have applied for a job, but the heuristic number is over 10,000. Through this. Just to put that into context. How fun is that, right? Won't get me to eat Domino's, but it's still a cool example. Or let's take something from a completely different prism. I know some of you work at big companies, many of you have worked at big companies before, right? In most companies, the annual review is not an amazing experience, let's say, right? Neither for the employee or the manager. In most companies, not yours, don't want to besmirch anyone, the annual review process looks something like this. Your boss, like a troll, descends from his mountain cave after you haven't seen him for a year. And he comes bearing a piece of paper, right? And forces you to sit down for 45 minutes for an awkward conversation about things that you've done in the past year, giving you feedback you have never heard before, right? And throughout this entire conversation, you're expected to absorb this feedback in a positive and constructive way, while you're waiting for the pre-agreed upon outcome, which has already been approved by HR. So the 45-minute session is really just a hoop you have to jump through because you know 3 layers of management had to sign off on the thing at the bottom of the paper. At which point you sign off on it, your boss back to his mountain cave, right? Gone for another year. That's what it looks like. And from the manager's perspective, it's often, oh my God, fuck, annual reviews, oh my God, wait till the last minute, last weekend, crunching, writing them up, making shit up, skipping stuff over, I can't remember what happened in February, right? Okay. Not good, no upside. Doesn't sound good in any way. So, set against this backdrop, amazing story, startup named Ripple, launches this idea. It says the annual review's broken, let's fix it. And the way that it works now is instead of all this mess, anytime somebody, a superior, a subordinate, or a peer inside the organization does something worthy of recognition, you pull your smartphone out, you click a button, and you instantly recognize them for well done. Boom. Thanks for the help with that pitch. Great coffee this morning. Thanks for these TPS reports, really appreciate it. It doesn't matter what it is, you recognize them for it. And in the process, the company gets a mountain of data it didn't have before. A mountain. Because before, the annual review process is a long-form text review that is hard to mine for data. And it only reflects what your manager sees above the waterline. So anything that happens below it, like if you're the support person on a big sales team, you don't get any recognition for that, unless your manager somehow knows what all the work that you've done. It's a mountain of data. It allows for 360 feedback, and most importantly, it's not tied to cash incentives for every little action that a user takes. It's not about giving people $10 gift cards when they do a good job, like a hamster on a wheel. It's about giving them recognition for that work, which is something that they're very motivated by, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on. So this is what's amazing. Let me tell you the amazing upside of this story. So in the companies where it has been used, this concept has become the de facto standard, replacing the annual review like wildfire. So for example, Spotify, the very popular music streaming service, there are no annual reviews at Spotify. There's only this, right? Living Social, there are no annual reviews at Living Social, just this. Facebook, happening very rapidly, removing the annual review in favor of this. And the company Ripple, that was the pioneer of this space, of the feedback space, was bought by Salesforce.com for $65 million after 18 months because they were so successful with it, right? Feedback, friends, and a little bit of fun in the mix, building incredible engagement. And the other piece of it, which I think is awesome, totally opt-in. So at Spotify, at Living Social, and at Facebook, you don't have to use the system if you don't want to. If you want the traditional annual review just the way you always had it, complete with trolls and mountain caves, you can have it. Or you can have this. Surprise, right? 98% of Spotify employees, 95% of Living Social employees choose this voluntarily. Yes?
Do you think that's determined by the generation that they're part of? So millennials want that constant feedback
Yes.
and recognition, whereas somebody who's a baby boomer might be more comfortable with the annual?
Some of it is that, and some of it is this other very important adage, which is kind of lost in there, but interesting, which is, if you have something that's kind of shitty and boring, even a little bit more engagement will suddenly make people flock to it. A little bit goes a long way. And I challenge you guys to think about this. Spend an hour tomorrow. I don't care what part of your day it is, preferably when you're out and about, like maybe on your way to work or on your way home. Spend an hour tomorrow just paying close attention to how fun and engaging the world is that you're interacting with. Like when you swipe this thing, right, through the turnstile, how much fun is that? How engaging is that? If you had a choice of doing something else, would you do something else? If what was presented to you. Would you do anything except for this thing? Right? Anything. Right? In fact, if there was a free market, this company might fail on the basis of this alone. Right? You might choose one bus entirely because this thing is ridiculous. So the point is, there's many, many opportunities to raise the level of feedback, friends, and fun, even incrementally, and create major change. So part of it is, and that's always a conflation here, part of it is that we don't know how much of this effect is purely because the old system was just really terrible, and how much of it is from the new system is amazing. And it's actually a really smart and clever solution. You can try it out for free online. Another example, kind of marketing example from Tabasco. You guys all know the hot sauce, okay? So, brilliant idea from Tabasco. Their idea was that there's a shared community around spicy food, and every drop of Tabasco that you use is the equivalent of a loyalty point. So they built Tabasco Nation, which is a Facebook application in which you earn 1 point for every drop of Tabasco that you use. Boom, boom, boom. The more you use Tabasco, the more points you earn. And you can compete in all kinds of semi-ridiculous challenges to earn like major points and major cred in the community, like put Tabasco sauce on your cake, use Tabasco in France, where it's not very popular, all this kind of stuff. Take Tabasco on a trip around the world, all this kind of cool stuff. In about 6 months, Tabasco doubled its total social media presence. With Tabasco Nation doubled in total. And just to give you a sense of scale, that's from 500,000 to 1 million Facebook followers in that context, and 1 million to 2 million Twitter followers. Anyway, just about doubled in that period of time. And that was just by unpacking this sort of like, hey, Tabasco's a fun thing that people can engage in, and maybe there's a community around that idea. Feedback, friends, and fun. Or another one, this is the UK's Department of Work and Pensions. So when I say the UK's biggest governmental agency, it accounts for 28% of the total budget of the United Kingdom's like government overall, and employs 110,000 employees, is innovation the first thing that you think of when you think of that organization? Probably not. And this is very old. This really accounts for about 1/3 of the UK government's total expenditure, this one division. So DWP, looking for ways to try to like spark innovation in their organization, came up with this cool concept called Idea Street. And basically the way that Idea Street works is very cool and very simple. Anybody inside the organization can propose an idea that the organization should follow to help reduce costs or improve the quality of service, improve throughput of processes. That idea becomes a stock that employees can buy or sell on a virtual stock market with virtual currency. So you can invest this virtual currency that you get as a starting point in these stocks, in these assets, in this market. And in the space of 90 days after launching Idea Street, the DWP had 1,500 ideas from its group. They saved £10 million, like in that first 90 days with the top idea that was proposed. And they had 30 ideas or so that had surfaced to the top that were vetted, fully vetted by people who were effectively incentivized to participate because the tracking stock was increasing in value in this virtual economy from it, right? This is not an innovation-prone environment. This is not going into a high-growth startup in Silicon Valley and asking them to innovate. This is the fucking Department of Work and Pensions in the United Kingdom. These are lifers. Okay? Truly, they are actually lifers, for real. You can't fire them under any circumstance. Really fascinating. Cool stuff. At the heart of many of those examples, the ones I'm going to talk to you about are another set of concepts, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. When we talk about the deeper meaning, many of you have read Dan Pink's Drive, he talks about this. Much of the deeper meaning in good gamified examples comes from mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And one guy who knows this very well is a guy named Charlie Kim. And Charlie's a CEO of a company called NextJump, which is based here in New York City. And NextJump is probably the biggest startup you've never heard of. It's a $150 million company. It's been around for 15 years. But most importantly, Charlie cares a great deal about fitness and wellness. He believes that his employees, he has about 400 of them, he believes that they should be physically fit. Now, there's lots of good reasons. They're self-insured, so it will lower their health insurance costs. More healthy employees who work out are less absentee, less presentee, right? They're healthier overall. And it turns out that if you work out more, you're cognitively superior to people who don't, the research says, probably because of blood flow. Anyway, so he's got lots of different reasons to want his employees to work out more. But the main reason is he just believes they should for their own good. So he did what most companies do when he wants people to work out, when they want people to work out. He put a free gym in each one of his 4 offices. Some of you may have worked at a company with a free gym before, yeah? And what he found was that about 2% of the employees used the free gym. It was people who were going to Equinox every day, were paying $200 a month for a high-end gym membership, traded down to the free one. Why pay $200? I got a free gym at the office. I'm going to the local Equinox, right? It's a really nice gym, yeah. So he was like, okay, I think we can do better. So he introduces a contest, which is the instinct of most people trying to market products using games. The first thing he did was put a contest in. He said, okay, I'm going to build an app. You check into the gym every time you go. The top 5 employees at NextJump who go to the gym the most often in a year will split a $20,000 prize. Pretty good, right? Pretty good motivation. He got about 12% of his employees to work out on a regular basis, that is 2 or more times per week with that incentive. Awesome. 12% in a population working out on a regular basis is amazing, but Charlie's a pretty high driving guy, and that wasn't enough for him. So he introduced 2 game mechanics at NextJump. The first one was he allowed people to play in teams instead of individually. And the second one was he set up a leaderboard so the teams could compare their scores against each other. Today, 90% of NextJump employees work out on a regular basis, that is 2 or more times per week. I'm telling you, you've never been in a place where 90% of the people work out that often. Your gym doesn't have that many people working out. In fact, by the way, true story, in the United States, 66% of gym memberships are used once per year. Just to put that into context. You've never been in a place like that. Never, 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 never. They're super high strung, so like you show up and it's like, hey Gabe, what's up? Welcome to NextJump. Like they're all on Red Bull or something, but it's cool, it's cool. Okay. So, how did they do this massive, unbelievable behavior change? What's at the heart of this? So, there are lots of lessons from Charlie. One of them is he never forced anybody to play. That was a good lesson. The second one is he activated people's innate sense of tribalism by allowing them to play in teams instead of individually. And tribalism is a very powerful force, right? Think about the Olympics or the World Cup, right? You've got all these people who couldn't give a shit about the country they're from, right, or their family's from, and suddenly it's like World Cup time, it's like, Senegal, yeah! How many generations removed from Senegal exactly is your family right now? All that. It's a really powerful force. It gets people really engaged and excited, and if done authentically, and this is key, if done authentically, tribalism is a very powerful force for engaging people. You can't force it, you gotta have it, it's gotta be real. And the second thing is a leaderboard, which can be powerful, or it can be a powerful motivator or demotivator. I talk a lot about that in the various design books. But it's an amazing, amazing story. Here's the kicker. 85% of NextJump's employees are software engineers, which is not a community known for their physical fitness acumen. I didn't tell you what they did, you notice in the story. They could have been personal trainers, but they're software engineers. That's the backdrop against which this behavior change happened. Amazing, you should totally watch it. Watch his talk, it's fascinating. A couple more examples I think are interesting, master autonomy and purpose. Autodesk, you guys know, 3D modeling software. They make very famous 3D modeling software. Costs about $3,500 a seat, expensive stuff. Their business model is a free trial to pay. You can download the software for 30 days, it's free. After 30 days, $3,500 if you want to buy a seat of the software. This is Autodesk. Now, every time some major 3D movie comes out, like Finding Nemo, downloads of the trial spike because everyone's like, oh, that's so cool, I want to do that, let's do that. I want to model this stuff. But what Autodesk found was that their conversion rates seemed to be dependent when they were looking at the data on how long people were using the software. People got really excited because they wanted to do 3D modeling and then realized, oh man, it's hard. It's actually hard to do. It's not easy. That's why those people get paid real money. It's not easy to do. So they would download this trial and not convert. And so Autodesk said, we've got to find a way to get people to understand our product. Our product is complicated. The more they understand the product, the more likely they'll be to convert. That was the theory. So they gamified the trial version. Using Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego as an inspiration, you download a trial of Autodesk 3ds Max, you download the trial, and you're basically given a challenge to uncover the clues to a mystery that you travel around the world to uncover. And each clue is unlocked by you learning one of the features of the software. So, build a 3D model. Now, rotate the model. Now, light the model. Now, move the object. Now, bounce the object, right? So all these different things that you have to be able to do to learn the 3D software, they did in the frame of this particular game. And what Autodesk was actually able to achieve was amazing. They raised the total time in the trial, so the total amount of time people spent using the software in trial mode, by 40%, and increased bottom line revenue by 15%. Which is astonishing, especially at $3,500 a seat. That's not insignificant behavior change. And that was all by attaching gamification, so I talked about mastery, autonomy, and purpose, attaching it very specifically to helping people achieve that. Helping people achieve their goals and what they want to achieve using this technique. And along those lines, last example I want to share with you is a thing called Foldit, which some of you might be familiar with. So built at the University of Washington, Foldit aims to get people to help aid in the discovery of important drugs and solutions for diseases. It turns out that much of scientific research on disease now is focused on understanding DNA and RNA, elemental proteins and amino acids. We have to understand how they're structured in order to be able to come up with custom drugs and figure out how diseases work. But we cannot see any of those things under a microscope. We cannot look at them under a microscope, so we don't really know what they look like, except in doing this process where we model them and assume what they look like and figure it out. And the process of doing that is called folding. It's complicated, it's hard, but most interestingly, computers are not very good at it. Computers are not good at this process. But humans are intrinsically wired to be able to fold relatively well, because it's all about finding symmetry in a system. So humans are wired to do that well. So the researchers at University of Washington wanted to find a way to tap into that. And so they created, after 3 years of work, this game called Foldit. And Foldit had an amazing breakthrough. After 15 years of scientists being blocked in finding the structure of an elemental protein in the fight against HIV, for 15 years scientists have been trying to sort this thing out. In 2011, 49,000 people playing Foldit for 10 days unlocked the protein structure that had been stumped. They just stumped for 15 years, could not figure it out, playing this game. Now, here's the interesting part. You can watch the talk from the designer of Foldit on gsummit.com. The interesting thing about it, to me, was that Foldit is actually hard. They could have hidden the process of folding a protein inside of some kind of metaphor, like planting flowers and harvesting them, and had a computer do the translation in the background, but they didn't do that. They said, no, you know what, this is kind of hard. You can do it, but this is kind of hard. But we're going to leave the complexity and difficulty out in the open. We're going to leave that on the open. And we're going to appeal to your sense of higher purpose in order to get you to do this thing. And we're going to make this fun and give you lots of feedback. We're going to show you how you're doing, how your team is doing, how the world is doing against this goal. We're going to give you lots of positive reinforcement as you do it, and we're going to change behavior. Here's the awesome part. Of the 49,000 people who played Foldit to uncover this, uncover that HIV, this elemental structure, 50% of them had no math or science training whatsoever. Like none. So these are people who have no background in this subject at all. And they pick up this very hard thing, and they see it through, and they play it, and they do it. And that's, I think, an amazing sort of example of it. Okay, actually, I want to share one more, and then we'll be done. So, you know Siemens, the German engineering company? Well, you guys all know it? Okay. So Siemens built this game called Plantville. And it sounds like Farmville from Zynga, but nothing but the name is in common. It's a simulation game for plant managers, people who run factories. Facilities, right? Production facilities and so on. Now, this in and of itself sounds kind of interesting, but what really makes it interesting is that at its peak, Plantville had about 25,000 people playing the game on average per day, of which 4/5 were people who ran plants for a living. So just to put this into context, you'd go to your job, run in a factory, you come home from your job, take your pants off, order a pizza, and sit down and play factory manager all night long until your spouse pries you away from the computer. I mean, seriously, who are these people? And where are they from? And what is this about? It sounds ridiculous. Ridiculous, right? Until you start unpacking what was going on here and how these things existed. You remember, some of you may remember the media made a big deal about soldiers who were out in the field in Afghanistan and Iraq would come back and play like Call of Duty at their base. So they'd go out, do a sortie, blow things up or whatever, come back, take a shower, play blow things up games. And it was like, what? And the same thing was happening in Plantville. Here's the thing. You do your job, or you have your interaction with the product or service or whatever, that is originally based on some kind of passion or some kind of connection that you have with it. But over time, the world kind of beats that passion out of you, and it becomes a 9-to-5 sort of thing. What gamified systems allow us to do, in some cases, is play with the boundaries of reality and put ourselves, reconnect with that thing that makes us really excited about it, stretch and pull our lives in ways that are really compelling. Let me put this into an example. So let's say that you run a nuclear power plant now. That's your job, right? So every day you go into your job at this nuclear power plant, hoping to God that today is not the day the plant melts down, right? But you kind of hope it is a little. Because it would be kind of amazing, but oh my God, so terrible, but really a little fun, and like kind of horrifying, and really bad, but oh my God, yes. It's like, you do this thing, I mean, you train for that your whole life, like a pilot, right? I mean, you're training your whole life for what happens if the engines go out. You hope it never happens, but it kind of would be fun to test your limits and see how it would work. This is one thing that we can do. This is a big thing that we can do with these systems when they're done well. And allow people, in a broad sense, to reconnect with the thing that made their thing interesting in the first place, their job, their relationship, the world around them. Allow them to bring that back together. And I'm not talking about namby-pamby visions of virtual reality and Second Life where we're all like doing porno stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about targeted, focused solutions that are engender this kind of lateral thinking and openness and socializing, feedback, friends, and fun on a bit of a scale. Okay, so putting this all together, it seems like gamification, by and large, is a sort of nice-to-have concept, right? Companies that talk about in Gamification Revolution, talk about it on the web, give you some examples. Companies that seize gamification now are killing it, they're doing great things, it's great, it's a nice-to-have, no big deal, whatever, blah, 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 it's a fad. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't think we really have much of a choice in this. I think we are on the cusp of a demographic tidal wave that's begun to crest. Some people feel it. Some people feel it very viscerally. Other people don't. And it's going to absolutely swallow whole anybody who's in the way of the tsunami. And it is the dual factors of the millennial generation and the extraordinary rise in autism and ADHD that are accompanying it. Those two groups of people, there's a lot of overlap obviously between the two, but those two groups of people represent a complete sea change in how the world works. They think about things really differently. Let me tell you, for the millennial generation will not sit around and take the same boring gray crap that the rest of us had to take. It just won't. They're already showing that they will not do it. They will not come work for you. They will not buy your product. Or they might buy your product if it's the only option, but if they're not gonna like it. And they'll be agitating and churning on ways to get around it. Same thing with people on the mild side of the autism spectrum disorder. They're not engaged by the world as it is today. They operate at a different frequency and a different speed. And the world today treats them like they're a problem, just like it does with the millennial generation. Is, like Google, by the way, just for shits and giggles, Google millennial management. It's one of my favorite subjects to Google because it's like old people complaints, like on Google, like millions of them. These millennials are so full of themselves. They were spoiled, they never had competition, so they like can't take it, they can't sit down, and they can't focus.
And especially baby boomers saying
Yes,
that,
exactly, right? And their parents would have said the same thing about them. But there really is a massive jump happening. And a lot of this is, I talk about it in my new Google Tech Talk if you're interested, Google Author Talk if you're interested in watching it. This concept called techno-physio-evolution, which is the idea that technology is pushing an evolutionary step in humanity. And because of many of these technologies, it's accelerated in a way that's leaving everybody else behind. We often think about needing to reform the world to support the millennials, or, and I'm sorry that I'm putting them together, I could talk about the differences at length, but just bear with me. Changing the world so that the millennials will be successful. Changing the world so that the autistic will be successful, or people with ADHD will be successful. But what if we have that entirely backwards? What if it's the people without the innate technical skill, the ones who didn't grow up with that technology, who don't know how to use social interactions in the same way, who aren't as fast at multitasking or dual processing or interacting with computers or writing software or doing any of those things, that are the ones that have the problem? What if? What if I'm the one with the issue and not my kids? And I would posit that what's different about this next generation with all the things that it has is that it has the tools to simply like turn its back on the existing structure and just say, it doesn't work for me, and therefore I don't care. They're not going to bend to the whim of the way things are. And so organizations, whether you're a nonprofit, a government, a company, or whatever, the sooner you understand this philosophy, the power of games, how it's reshaped the brain, how it's changed us using intrinsic reinforcement from the inside out, how systems that speak to mastery, autonomy, and purpose, feedback, friends, and fun allow us to do that, how making things, imbuing things with more game, loyalty, and behavioral economics characteristics makes them more compelling and engaging and allows you to level set the playing field. The sooner you understand that, the more successful you'll be at whatever it is that you want to do. So, it's not just about kiddies, it's not just about the kids, but it is very much about the future. Thank you. Thank you very much. Guys, and I forgot to mention that we actually built the world's first gamified co-reading app for the book, Gamification Revolution. So if you're interested in that, you can also check it out at gamrev.com. And it's all inside the book if you're interested. You can co-read in a gamified way with other people. It's festive. Yes, sir. Questions? We have time for questions, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Yes.
I'm actually interested more about the autistic kids, because it seems like that's a minority. I mean, yeah, I know there's increasing cases and how we measure it, but like how do you mix them with millennials? I mean, I completely understand the millennials. So that's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
But the
So without like belaboring the point, beating everybody over the head with it. So right now, close to 10% of the children in the United States have a prescription for ADHD-related medicine. 10%. So it's a big number.
How accurate is that?
That's-
Is that falsely prescribed or is it?
Yeah, that's,
Let's set that aside for a second. The fact I gave you was 10% of the population of the United States is currently taking something that against a diagnosis of ADHD. Whether that's accurate or not, those are the facts about that percentage of the population.
And the percentage of those that are boys?
It's really high.
Right.
Okay. Now, also today, close to 2% of girls and nearly 5% of boys in the United States have an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Today, currently, now in the United States. Even if you discount for crazy out-of-scale reporting, and if I showed you the chart, it looks like this. It starts in like the 1970s and starts just going sky high. Even if we take out all kinds of overdiagnosis elements, something is going on. Something is happening. That is a thing that is happening. That came out of nowhere. It is not all about overdiagnosis. Okay? And I think they all have in common, the thing they all have in common is computer technology. The thing they all have in common.
not food, not drugs.
I don't think so. And I think in the meantime, we're searching for some kind of environmental cause for it, like it's a disease, when perhaps it's actually just a natural evolution of humans in a like giant technology sea. Some percentage of them are really well adapted to working with technology, and they appear to not be able to interact with this thing that we're doing now. But this thing that we're doing now is like really slow for them, just really slow. And that's where that's the root of all this issue. It just doesn't, it's not the place. So, it to me is like, my core advocacy position on it is, thought of a different way. Like that percentage of the population that will grow up with that kind of diagnosis or that sort of issue, as it continues to mushroom, by the middle of this century, they'll represent a plurality of the population. Not a majority, but a big number, like 30% of the population. You can't keep calling that a disorder at some point. You know? Yes?
As someone who was diagnosed with ADD 15 years ago, I feel much better now.
Good.
I
I'm trying to normalize it for you.
appreciate that. I do appreciate that. I think a couple things are going on here. One is that a lot of companies really don't listen and pay attention to their customers and consumers. And if this is the way to reach them, they have to adjust that. The other thing comes back in terms of when you're building your products or you're building your apps, your marketing efforts. At one point, should you start thinking about incorporating gamification in?
Great question.
Because a lot of the things that seem to be happening here is that you're going in after the fact as
Yeah.
opposed to incorporating and blending it. So at what point do you bring it in?
Okay, so in the examples that I showed you, the majority of them, and most of the examples that you'll see, by a slim majority, are actually native build things. So they may be in an existing process, but they're new solutions. So they're not attempting to re-engineer an existing solution. They're like a new thing. Okay? But that's neither here nor there, because you're right. In a lot of cases, it's crafting something on top of it. The short answer to when you should think about gamification in a product or service is this. You should, from the very beginning of whatever it is that you're building, especially if it's a consumer-facing product or service, you should, from the very beginning, make sure two elements of the scaffolding are in place. I don't care if you actually have any overt expressions of gamification in it on day one, it doesn't matter. But you do need to have these two key elements in it from the beginning. The first thing you need is some kind of point system. Some kind of point system that tracks the performance and behavior of users in the system that you're using. You don't have to display it to them. I'm not saying you have to show them what their score is, but at minimum, you as the creator of that system need to see what people's scores are so that you can understand where they rate on the engagement level, right?
Does that assume they're doing the things you want them to be doing?
It's actually a tool to accomplish that. So the first thing that you do is you go through and look at all the actions that users are doing, and you assign some value to those things. This is the gamification design process I talk about in workshops or in my book.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do is, what are all the things users could do? Now assign some point value to them. Don't worry about what those points are worth, just think about, in relative terms, what are they worth to you, right? Assign some values to them. And then let them do the things and see whether or not those things actually reflect the way you wanted the world to work. tweak the economy until you have the numbers the way you want them, and then potentially make that public to the whole population as a system of behavior. And the second thing that you need is you need a funnel, an analytical funnel that shows you user engagement through the prism of those points. So essentially reporting. It allows you to see how people are moving from like disengaged people in your world through to people taking the core actions that you need. Those are the two things you have to have. So this is all part of an action-oriented view of user behavior. Those are the things we care about, actions. Not abstract concepts, actions. Things users will do. Yes? Yes, sir.
What are some of the things that, the implementations of game mechanics that you've seen other than what you guys have worked on that you really like?
I've showed you a few. But the examples that I've showed you are not
Right.
things we worked on.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah, no. These are things that other people build that I really like. And there's a lot of ones. There's really some great examples. We're just working on something cool right now that will like enable you to see all of them, all the examples. But if you go to gamification.co, there's like a ton of really great examples. In the book, like, you know, 3/4 of the book are case studies.
Thanks.
So you can kind of check some of those out. But I have lots of ones that I like in all these different spheres, including some that I have on. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have 2 questions about your examples.
Sure.
One was for the British Labour Department.
Yeah.
Were they able to redeem their well-performing stocks or anything? And
Yeah,
the
great
other
question.
question was for the speeding ticket one. Did it find like a price equilibrium after a point of time? In other words, you know, if everybody is complying with the law, there's nothing in the pot to pay out. So like, how did that work?
Yeah, great question. So for on the DWP side, yes, so you could redeem those points for various like prizes, and actually James Gardner, who designed it, he'll talk a little bit about that. He also built one at Barclays Bank, a similar thing at Barclays, where they had a real virtual economy where you could redeem it for cash, and it was kind of a fucking disaster. So the one at the DWP was like virtual things, like an extra day off, where, you know, first person to choose their vacation for this year, okay? And then the one at Barclays was with cash, and that just was like Lord of the Flies. So there's like so really a great object lesson in cash versus non-cash rewards. I skipped over this, but I talk about this a lot, and I talk about a lot of the books. This is a kind of hierarchy of rewards in gamified design. Status, access, power, and stuff. It's sort of the list of things that people want in order from most compelling to least compelling, and also cheapest to most expensive. So, as another thing in general that we think about in gamified design, we often start with the basic premise of how can we reward users with status rewards before we get to free things and cash and such. We always force ourselves from a discipline standpoint to create a status system for rewards. And then access, which is giving people access to something they can't buy, typically, like a lunch with the president of the company, as an example, one of these. Power benefits are things where people get to decide the fate of others or themselves. So who gets to go on this vacation, who gets to take their break first, so on, who's on my team. And stuff is cash, free things, discounts, coupons, and so on.
So for the British one, there was no like funding of it
No,
beforehand?
no, there was no actual, you couldn't take the points out from the economy as like dollars.
But you could
Okay.
use them for various prizes?
Yeah, prizes that were non-tangible prizes associated with kind of recognition and reward and so on that were virtual. And in the case of Speed Camera Lottery, I don't know what the price equilibrium model looks like. So far it's been super successful, and it's been so successful actually that Sweden is rolling it out around the whole country. So they took it from the pilot to the rest because it's been consistently quite effective. The thing is that the thesis is that everybody knows they shouldn't speed, right? So the penalties haven't changed in this case for speeding. So there's still going to be people who will break the rules, and still going to be people who factor that into their model and say like, I don't care, I got to get somewhere or whatever, I don't give a shit, I'm going to speed, right? So in theory there should always be some money, but absolutely, if you do a super effective behavior change at some point, you can put yourself out of business. Nobody will care about that anymore. It is definitely a downside, but I don't know what that number looks like for them. But you could ask, you watched the video of it from the creator, from Kevin Richardson, and you can totally ask Kevin. Just ask him on Yahoo what the numbers look like. Did you have a question?
I did.
Yeah.
So a lot of the examples you've been using kind of fall into 2 categories. There's the, dealing with employees and motivation that way, and the business to consumer stuff. But do you see an application for this, and if so, what with sort of your higher ticket services and items like, an advertising agency, an investment bank, a consultancy, things that are, partnering with someone to really make something happen. And,
Right. So the question was, there's what we call consumer loyalty examples and employee engagement examples. What about doing something with really high value transactions like management consulting or BPM consulting or something? So I think you mean, I think what you mean is something that's a B2B loyalty example, is what you're asking about, right?
Yeah,
Like part of the
do
transaction.
these principles in any way help a B2B business?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
There's lots of great B2B examples. Some of the ones I've showed you. For example, the Siemens example is a B2B example, right? That's Siemens BPM working with plant managers. They are the customers of Siemens.
Oh, they're the customers.
Yeah.
So that's thinking of it
yeah,
as the, okay.
yeah. There's a lot of really good B2B examples, and lots of them are up on the website. You can check them out.
Okay.
But most of them end up, the ones that you won't see a lot of is you won't see a lot of transactional loyalty in a B2B setting. And I think that's an often asked question, like, so I'm a consultant, I'm selling $250,000 a bite services to this Fortune 100, how can I incentivize the buyer at the Fortune 100 company to do business with me more often than with other people?
Or just making it better, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Getting their experience.
So
Yeah.
typically, so that case study, the consumer loyalty grafted to B2B sales, is something we don't see a ton of today.
Right.
I think it's touchy, it's hard to actually do. So what companies have done to address that is they've done client, typically they focus on like training and development aspects of that. So let's teach the client more about the product or service so that they want to work with us more. Or let's let them in on our process so they can see how the gears work, how we make their donuts in the background. That's like one thing that we kind of allow them to do. And there's a fair number of things in the finance area and the learning and development areas for that you might find interesting, as an example. The consultancies have been consulting firms have been really interested in gamification, but what they've been using it for has been improving their BPM process, so business process management, business process for engineering. So there's lots of amazing case studies like IBM, which I talk about in the book. They have a thing called Innovate, which is a BPM game that they built, a BPM gaming platform that they built. So you can examine different business processes and re-engineer them on the fly and see how they'll work and engage people. And it was a project that IBM built internally just to kind of use on their own BPM team, and then they figured they should put it out in the world and see what happens. And today it's the #1 lead generator for IBM globally. Wow. This game generates more leads for their consultancy than anything else. And you can actually play it. It won't be super fun if you don't do BPM stuff. Yes, sir.
I think you mentioned there was a cash reward in the Barclays example.
Yes.
And it didn't work.
There's cash rewards in Barclays and it did not work.
And is that?
Well, it worked, but not in the way you would. It had unintended consequences.
Well, my question is, whatever happened, was it a negative outcome because it was cash per se, or
Yes.
was the dynamics of
So
what was going on?
so have you guys read Drive? Some of you have read Drive by Dan Pink, I'm sure, yes. Okay, great. So much of the discussion in Drive, as in many books, pop psychology books on workplace motivation in the last 20 years in particular, have focused on this idea that research shows that people who are given extrinsic rewards for doing their job generally don't do as good of a job as people who are motivated intrinsically to do that job. Okay? So extrinsic rewards like money and so on don't motivate people as well in the long term and to do great things as the intrinsic motivation to want to do well and get recognition from your peers and so on. Okay, obvious, right? That's obvious. We can all agree with that assertion. That assertion makes a ton of sense on the surface. The confounding factor in all of that research, the thing that makes all that research complicated, that complicates it, is money is always the thing that's used as the extrinsic motivator in that research. The root of the problem is not extrinsic versus intrinsic reward. It's what extrinsic reward you're choosing to use. And when you use cash, it negatively affects behavior, always. Let me give you a thought example, just to put this into context. Okay, let's say you're walking down the street, and all of a sudden in front of you, an elderly gentleman trips and falls. And so you, being a good Samaritan, being not the nasty New Yorker that people think you are, You reach down and you help the guy up, and he says, "Thank you, Sonny. Here's $5." Right? What do you do?
No.
Right? You say, "Oh, come on, no, I'm not doing this because of the money. That's not why I did this. It's crazy. Keep your money." Right? Or you might say, $5? What the fuck? Your life's only worth $5. You let the M15 run over you, right?
Or knock them down again, so you pick them up.
Right. Or the third example, or the third possibility is you figure out, hey, there's a racket in here, and you work with an accomplice to knock people down and get their money. Those are the three, by the way, those are the three basic responses to the introduction of cash into an altruistic environment. They're always those same three possible responses. No, I don't reject, right? Consider the reward inappropriate, like too low or wrong, or scheme and find a way to game the system. Those are your three responses. Introduction of cash and altruistic environment. None of those has an upside to the creator of that reward system. There's no possible upside. There's none. There's no upside. You're not going to generate that behavior more by introducing cash there. What you're going to do is you're going to change the game. You're going to alter the outcome of the game. And so at its core, cash is a problematic motivator. And the main reason for that is a concept, the real underlying problem with that is a concept called habituation. Any of you remember Psych 101? Okay. So habituation is the idea that, and this is universal, your stimulus response system, your hearing, your sight, your taste, your touch, your senses, are designed to become habituated to inputs fairly fast. And this is an important evolutionary thing for humans, because if we didn't habituate, the way everyone in this room smells right now would make you crazy. If you could smell everyone at the same velocity all the time as you smell them the first time they walk into the room. Or the background noise, I don't know if you noticed, there's a bunch of background noise. You are habituated to it, so it tamps down, you don't notice it as much. You habituate. And the speed at which we habituate is based on the sensory input and where we're at emotionally, all this kind of stuff. But habituation is real. In fact, the New York Times, like 6 months ago, talking about this great research that showed that the average couple spends 2 years in a romantic relationship. The first 2 years of a romantic relationship are this period of romantic love, right? Where you wake up every morning and like, oh my God, this is amazing, you're so beautiful, I can't wait to sleep with you, right? I love you so much. And then after about 2 years, relationships on average switch to being companionship affection relationships, where you don't feel like that every day. You still like being around the person, but you're mostly getting pleasure from being with them, and they're a supportive part of your life. And I'm sure it's not your relationship is not like this, but the researchers like studied. They really looked longitudinally, looked at thousands of couples, and they said it's about 2 years is the point in time where this distinction happens, and they were trying to normalize it because couples feel like a failure when the second year comes along, and suddenly they don't want to fuck each other every minute, and so they were trying to normalize all this. The underlying thing is habituation. So let me put this into context. Sex with the hottest person you can get in the world has 2 years. It has 2 years lifespan. The average person, before it becomes dull. What do you have to do to keep your system of engagement working past year 2? Set against that background.
Jewelry.
And cash. Exactly. And so, because humans habituate to all sorts of stimuli, what it means is over time, the volume of each of these things has to go up. The reward needs to go up in volume and velocity and importance and intensity over time in order to keep people responding to it the same way. Status, access, and power can be increased for free. This increases at a linear cost rate. So they're all going to require increased reward over time, right? All of them to get the same behavior. This just happens to be exponentially more expensive than these three to deliver over time. Think about it this way. You remember your first paycheck? Take a second. Think back, your first paycheck, right? You got it as a check in your hand, or it was direct deposit in your account, or maybe you got a wad of cash if you work in the black market or something, right? Okay? However, that happened. That first paycheck, what was it like? It was like, oh, yeah, I'm rich. And you're like, yes, this is more money than I've ever seen before. Fuck yeah, I'm taking someone out for drinks, I'm gonna take my mom out for dinner, yeah. Okay, whatever it was, that first paycheck was amazing, right? It's amazing. Now, think about your last one. probably a lot more money. Do you react that way? Do you feel that way about it? You didn't, right? You didn't. You didn't. What would have made you notice, what would have made you respond is if it didn't arrive. Then you might have had a reaction. But you're not going to have a reaction to that, even though it's probably 300 times more than you made in your first time you made money. Right? This is habituation at work. It's not rational, it's not logical. It's just stimuli lose their effect over time. And they lose it in a hypergeometric way, so declines like that. So you got to focus on things that are about cash. So, back to your question about cash. Cash's problem is it has a weakening effect unless you keep it moving up exponentially. I can get you to walk through that door maybe for $10 now, but by the time we get to the third one, you're like, hey, I want 11. I'm not doing it for $10 anymore.
May I ask just a follow-up?
Sure, of course, yeah.
Is it also, though, a matter of context? So it may be that the context for getting cash in one situation is not appropriate, as in the example you gave where you
Sure.
help somebody.
Sometimes it's context, but at the end, because cash has this objective value, the problem is you can't hide the fact that the dollar amount isn't going up when people want the dollar amount to go up. So you're not going to get the same like dance for me monkey, right?
Title
By the
of the
third time or the
raise.
fifth time or the 100th time, you're not going to get it for the same amount of money. People aren't going to do it. They're not going to do it. It doesn't matter how poor they are.
So why does not the currency of status diminish in some way?
It does, but my point is you can increase the value of it over time, for mostly for free, as the creator of a system. So today I give you the status. I'll give you an example. Do you know what green, gold, platinum, black are? What are they?
Amex cards.
Right, they're Amex cards. It didn't start with green, gold, platinum, black. It started with green, and then there was gold, and then there was platinum, and then there was black. Is black inherently more valuable than green? As part of some, did they have some master plan when they started it? What are they? What do they represent? What's their purpose? What's their value? Right. They actually are, they're still fucking charge cards you have to pay off every month. They serve the exact same function, right? So it could have chosen to increase the reward system using any one of these methods. These rewards just would have cost them more money. They had to keep doing this so people had something they get engaged with and think there was another thing and another thing and another thing to continue to keep their engagement. Anyway, so there's, yeah, we could talk about this at ad nauseum, but more or less, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? An abstraction of that idea. Top pyramid. Yes, sir.
So I buy that the stuff in the bottom costs more than the stuff at the top.
Yep.
But when you introduced the slide, you said that the top stuff is more valuable. Yes?
The top stuff is more valuable to people.
To people.
Yes.
Is there
The
any,
value.
is there proof on that? Are there studies to show that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, most of the interesting research about the difference between those two things is all like kind of core Maslowian kind of research work. And it really looks more like point of indifference is lower for cash than it is for the other things, is basically how you draw the conclusion. So the number, do you know the point of indifference number for cash in the United States? $72,000 a year.
What do you mean where it doesn't make you
Correct.
behave differently?
Correct.
Yeah.
The average American worker at $72,000 a year no longer improves their performance with incremental cash. That is the limit for performance improvement. And after that, the money's more or less superfluous for most American workers, not for everybody, obviously.
Because it seems to me that within the population of your workers, the gamers, that different people are going to respond to those different stimuli.
Yes, different people will respond differently to different stimuli, for sure. But the interesting thing about status, which to me is a fascinating thing about it, that it's a very, very like universal concept. And in fact, my favorite example about it is research on status in anarchical structures. So in anarchist societies, they simply replicate a status pyramid just facing the opposite direction. So status is derived from who's the most anti-establishment, right? But this is something very innate to humans. And we talk about it in the book, the importance of status and status structures and some of the interesting research about it. It actually makes you live longer. People who are higher status live longer. Crazy. Not and controlled for access to healthcare. Totally true. I'm telling you, it's true. Yeah, it's crazy. Yes, sir.
Can you give us an example of a gamification that improved sales and actual payments? For example, in e-commerce site where we see a direct correlation of some system that has been put in place.
Yeah, gamification for sales and e-commerce that raises revenues.
There's a money transaction involved.
Yeah, well, there's, I mean, the Autodesk one is a money transaction, a $3,500 money transaction, so not an insignificant buy-in as a case study for you. But there's a few other ones. Like, you can look at some of the kind of gamified loyalty programs, like Zappos VIP program as an example. That's been quite successful at raising, raising revenues for folks. Often companies are like hesitant to talk about the exact dollar amounts, but we have quite a few case studies, both in the book and also online, directly associated with revenue. But probably the most kind of overarching case studies you're looking for are the loyalty case studies. That's the section you want to be looking at, the customer loyalty section, because usually those are the examples that are associated with that question. Yes, sir?
We've been playing games for millennia, right?
We've been playing games for millennia, that's true. Yeah, for millennia.
Come we're only, I mean,
Why now?
Recently,
Good
yeah.
question. Why now? Why gamification now? Why do we care now? Okay, so to be honest with you, lots of different answers. I won't belabor the point, and then we can break and hang out, or you can go have dinner in Koreatown, whatever your plans are. Because you're not eating in Times Square, right? Okay. So we are dangerously close, you guys, to the black hole here. Okay, so. You're right, we've been playing games for millennia. In fact, games are a different form of art from other kinds of art. I think I talked about it a little bit in the book, but it's fascinating, okay? So games like chess or checkers or Go, which are very old games, they don't have a creator. We don't know who designed them, right? We do have artwork from the 14th century with people's names on it, because we knew that art was a thing that somebody did at that time that was property, that was creative effort. But games come from something different. We didn't think to record who invented it until the 20th century. Until then, we didn't really care. It was like, oh, that's a game, we're playing it, okay, right, more or less. Late 19th century. It's a different thing. What's happened now is a confluence of a lot of factors, this attention economy, to some extent, the Zynga and Foursquare examples from 2010 were very apocryphal for people. People looked at those and goes, oh, wait a minute. Foursquare's getting all these people to do this stuff that doesn't make any sense. How does that happen? How can I get a little bit of that magic? So there's a little bit of that. But the other piece of it, the other big pieces of it are the gamer generation. So now we have, it's 40 years since the start of the contemporary video game industry, which means that 2 full generations have grown up with video games as a core part of their consumption. So it's not just the millennials, it's people my age. I'm 39. So I was the first group where the Atari 2600 showed up in my childhood, right? I'm the first generation. And so there's been 2 distinct generations since me that, including the end of mine, that grew up with games as a core thing. So this is already kind of bubbling up into culture and the world that we live in as a result of that. And probably lastly is we now have a series of tools and technologies and platforms that make some of this stuff scalable. The technology to make this happen is really cheap. Just to put this into perspective for you, quick stat, we'll go. If you wanted to launch a loyalty program before the advent of gamification, like you wanted a points program for your customers to come and they earn a point for every dollar they get and then they get to spend those points on whatever, the entry price point for that kind of a service was $500,000. That was the entry point. And you could expect to spend between $500,000 and $1 million a year to have a program of that kind managed on an ongoing basis. There were third-party companies who could do that for you, more or less. That's the approximate price point. And so, needless to say, most companies didn't launch those, right? The majority of all loyalty programs in the world are buy 10, get 1 free programs, right? 95% of all loyalty programs are that form. A card where you punch or draw or whatever, buy 10, get 1 free, some variant. And the big points ones where you earn points and redeem points in a complicated system with all the levers and everything, those were reserved for big companies. Fortune 1000s had those. Nobody else had that. You didn't see that at a mom and pop shop Nobody could have that because it was really expensive. It was $500,000. Today, the buy-in cost for the basic system like that is $10,000. That's happened since 2011. This is more software eating the world stuff. This is gamification eating loyalty from another side, because it's all these new style gamified loyalty companies entering the market and going, hey, why are you paying $1 million to AMIA for this big infrastructure when we can deliver the outsourced version for between $10,000 and $100,000 to you? So this is a big reason as well why people are looking at it. It's like, that's really affordable. $100,000 for a fully hosted system to do this at scale for a Fortune 100 is cheap, and frankly, it's cheap even for a much smaller company if it delivers value.
Were airlines the first ones?
What?
Were airlines?
Airlines were the first ones in the contemporary sense, but I talked more about the history in my first book in game-based marketing, but S&H green stamps is probably the example, the contemporary example that's most canonical. And it was here in the US in the 30s, you got little stamps for every dollar that you spent, and you collected those stamps up and then you took them to a catalog or you took them to a store. And they were the first kind of what we call coalition loyalty program, in the contemporary sense. But between 1936 or 1932 and 1981, there was very little innovation. Then in 1981, the contemporary loyalty program that we think of today, which was American Airlines, launched. And that was this current generation. And then now, super disrupted by gamification, just being rethought, from the ground up. Anyway, thanks you guys. So awesome. Thank you.